All right, so this is the second in a two-parter of pen test preparations. In this particular one, we're talking about post-exploitation preparation. Now, if you missed the first one was web application preparation. How can you prep your team for a penetration test? And the kind of the goal of this, just give you guys a little bit of background on it, is twofold. First, we want to make sure that whenever we're doing pen tests for our customers, we have videos that we can point them to get them ready for the penetration test, because that's a huge question. People are like, okay, we're going to hire your company, you're going to come in, you're going to do stuff. How can we be as ready as we possibly can for that stuff that you're going to do? And that's the goal of these two presentations, basically web application and of course pen test preparations for post exploitation as well. Now another question has popped up. Why not use a meeting tool? Doesn't support Linux. I have to use Windows VM to join. Oh, Austin. I just complaints. And who exactly got you hooked on Linux in the first place, Mr. Scott? So all's fair, all's fair. All right, so let's jump right in and let's talk about this one. Now, this is brought to you by the mighty SANS 504 Hacker Techniques and Incident Handling class by Grandmaster Ed Scotus. Ed Scotus is like a big brother to me. I owe my entire career to Ed Scotus, and this class is a huge part of everything that I do. If you like what you see here with the webcast and the way that the webcast flows and how we approach things and how we present it, you're going to want to check out 504. It's basically 6 days of this, where we basically talk about cool security things, hang out, and make fun of each other all the time. Oh, here we go. When you get a moment, can you post a link to the recording to the first webcast? Yeah, Matt. Actually, if you get a chance, one of the things that you can do is just go to blackhillsinfosec.com/media. Or if you just go to our website and click on media, it basically takes you right to it. Okay, so you should be able to get those. All of our archived ones are there in the media section of the Black Hills InfoSec website. So yeah, this is brought to you by SANS 504. And if you've taken 504, let's say 5 years ago, I'm just throwing this out there. You're going to want to take it again. And the reason why you're going to want to take it again is we've done a lot of big improvements. Ed Scotus and I have just been working, I don't want to say tirelessly, because that gets this idea of, Ed Scotus and I in the middle of the night burning candles, working on shoes and updating 504. And that's not quite the way it's been, because we do take breaks periodically as well. And it is brought to you by Black Hills Information Security. The owner of Black Hills Information Security, Paul Asadoorian, is a consultant with Black Hills Information Security, as is Timothy Tomes, Lemester53, Ethan Robish, Joff Thayer, Mike Perez. We've got Benjamin Donnelly. We have all kinds of people at Black Hills Information Security who just absolutely love breaking into things for a living. And as I said, this is predominantly set up so when we're talking to customers, getting them ready, we want our customers to be as ready as possible. And this isn't just a Black Hills InfoSec thing. This is a paul.com thing. We want to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to try to secure their networks as well as possible for an eventual compromise or a pen test. The agenda today, we're going to start it out. We're going to say, so you've been exploited. We're going to talk about segmentation. We're going to talk about bad network protocols. We're going to talk about shares and detecting insiders. And we're going to give those low and medium vulnerabilities a good once over and a how's your father to basically look at them and really give them a second chance. And that's probably one of the most important things about this webcast is so many of our customers are just focusing on reds and purples and, these critical level vulnerabilities, when in fact, a lot of times when we're pen testing, we gain access to networks simply through the low and medium vulnerabilities as well. We're also going to share some cool resources of different, we're going to share some resources of different types of places you guys can go online to get some good post-exploitation cheat sheets as well. So you've been exploited, but this is in a good way, right? This isn't that you've been exploited by a hacker. This is you've been exploited by a penetration tester. Now, that mindset of being exploited is something that should always be a possibility in your organization, that you should always be expecting that a compromise is going to occur. Now, the reason why I draw this up and the reason why I think this is so important is if you look at information security today, the vast majority of us in information security spend far too much time on trying to detect and prevent, or actually more accurately, prevent the attacks. We spend a tremendous amount of time, effort, and money on firewalls. We spend a tremendous amount of time, effort, and money on intrusion prevention systems and antivirus products. And we set up all of these different technologies, and we put so much love, care, and feeding into them that we completely neglect the big question that needs to be answered. What happens when you do get compromised? We don't have that fallback. We've been talking about defense in depth since the early 90s, maybe even the late 80s, talking about defense in depth architectures, trying to set up strategies that it isn't just a DMZ that's protecting our environment, when the fact of the matter is that's all many organizations have. Now, we can talk about antivirus, but to be honest with you, we beat up antivirus continuously. In fact, we're going to have a webcast coming up from Mark Baggett, an employee at SANS and one of the smartest people I know, if not the smartest person I know in computer security. It's going to give a whole hour-long presentation on bypassing antivirus engines, just so you can leave them in smoldering ruins. They're just not that hard to bypass whatsoever. We would keep on putting money back into these technologies, and there's a number of reasons why we need to look beyond these technologies. 0 days, of course, phishing attacks, social engineering. A lot of these things aren't even technical in nature. Basically getting someone to click a link and then take over their computer system. It's attacking the humanware of an organization. But the fact of the matter remains, you're going to get compromised, whether it's by a penetration testing firm or whether or not it's by an attacker. And we need to shift our mindset from trying to prevent the attack in the first place, putting all of our effort and energies in preventing that attack, to moving to something more along the lines of, let's make an assumption that these particular systems are going to be compromised. And that's where we're at here. First up, segmentation. We need to start segmenting our internal networks now, and this needs to be done all the way down at the desktop level. I was really, really, really bummed that Malware Jake couldn't make it to the webcast today. He was going to be my backup to Paul Asadoorian, but he had to be on an airplane. And Malware Jake does a lot of really heavy pen tests, like in advanced networks that don't mess around. They have really good security. And I remember we were spending some time talking about what is it that makes a pen test difficult from the post-exploitation perspective. And there's a correlation. The more segmentation you have in your environment, the more difficult it's going to be for me to be a successful pen tester in your environment after I get on one of your computer systems. Now, this should be all the way down to the desktop level, okay? This should be all the way down to the desktop level on your systems. All of your systems have some type of firewall that you can enable. Whether or not it is a Windows 7 system, and you can use NetSHW, you set up NetSH, the firewall config, or NetSH advanced firewall configuration for Windows 7 systems, or if you've already paid for Symantec or you've already paid for McAfee, you can turn that firewall on. Turn it on at the desktop level, and I'll show some slides here in just a little bit that articulate kind of what we're talking about. So we need to lock down to the desktop level so the workstations cannot talk to each other. And we also need to isolate subnets from each other as well. Now, it strikes me as insane that pass the hash and pass the token attacks were effective over 6 years ago, and they still are today. I don't know why this is. There's a whole bunch of different vulnerabilities that will show up, and then people quickly patch them or fix them. But for post-exploitation, pass the hash and pass the token attacks are two that still work in 98% of the environments that we test in today. Now, let me explain what they are for those of you that don't know. With pass the hash, if I get access to a system, I can dump the password hashes from that computer system. Now, with pass the hash, I don't need to know what your password is. All I need is your password hash. Now, this has to do with the way that LANman and NTLM v1 actually work for authentication. And even NTLM v2, whenever you're looking at LANman, NTLM v1, NTLM v2, when you're authenticating, the authentication is done with the password hash. Now, to be sure, it'll go through and wrap that hash in a number of different things, getting more and more complex as we move up to NTLM v2. But the core of the matter is, whenever one system is trying to authenticate you to another computer system, it's not passing your password, it's passing a hash of that password. So this is weird because the systems don't even know what your password is. All of the authentication is based on the hash itself. Now, there's varying levels of how you can do this, and you can do it correctly over a network connection. But let's just say that by and large, Microsoft and the way that they do authentication kind of does it wrong. Whenever you have tools like Cain and Abel that can intercept, pull out the password hashes, and crack them, that's a bad thing. Now, pass the hash is different than pass the token. You see, whenever you're authenticating to a system, like a standalone local system, you can use LANman, NTLM v1, NTLM v2. When you're using pass the token, Tokens are used in domain environments because many domain environments are basically a mashup of like Kerberos and LDAP because it's Active Directory, right? So you can get this token that authenticates you to other systems. So that domain token can also be intercepted, and then you can use that domain token to access other resources. And here in just a little bit, I'll show you kind of visually how the vast majority of pen tests go from a post-exploitation perspective as well. The point is, these two attacks, pass the hash, pass the token, were effective 6 years ago, and they're still very, very successful today in gaining access to networks. And that bothers me because it shows that we're not learning. It shows that we as a community are getting lazy in a number of different ways. We have to do better than that. And we need to make an assumption that we are going to get compromised. Getting compromised is something that is absolutely going to happen. And I've said this in a number of classes, in a number of webinars. We're going to say it again. I want you guys to kind of listen to me very closely. Getting compromised is okay. Now, I know that that's horrifying and there's people that freak out about that concept, but you have to be okay about being compromised. It's kind of like, the Dr. Strangelove, like how I learned to stop fearing and learn to love the bomb. You are going to get compromised. And the reason why it's so important for you to mentally set up that it's okay that you're going to get compromised is because that's the first stage of acceptance. You need to accept the fact that you're going to get compromised. However, where a system getting compromised may be acceptable in some fashion because it's an eventuality. It's basically saying like, well, it's okay to get hit by a hurricane. You're going to get hit by a hurricane. It doesn't make it a wondrous thing, doesn't make it a fun thing, but it's a thing that's going to happen, but you can prepare for it. Because while getting compromised or having a system that gets a compromise may be acceptable, what is unacceptable moving forward is an attacker persisting for months, if not years. What is unacceptable is an attacker pivoting from one compromised computer system to the rest of the network in less than an hour and getting domain administrator. I have a lot of pen testers on this webcast right now, a lot of people that I respect immensely, people that I consider to be titans in the industry. And if you sit and you talk to a lot of these people, many times after they get access to a system, it's less than an hour for them to get domain admin. This isn't super genius time. This isn't that these guys are absolutely brilliant. It's just the fact that our tools for doing this absolutely rock. Absolutely rock. So Jared basically came up and he said, slight disagreement. Accepting that you're going to get compromised isn't the same as being compromised is okay. I think it's a distinction without a difference. And Jared, whenever we have time, we can sit down over beer and we can go over it. But I think what I'm trying to get at is it's a mental mindset. And the reason why it's a mental mindset and we need to start accepting is because if we don't accept that, if we don't accept the fact that we're going to get compromised, and we start working towards developing security structures to handle that compromise and that failure point, we're going to be in a situation where management continuously expects us to stop all attacks. And let me use an analogy, and I love using this analogy all the time. Failure is a part of your life. Failure is a part of your life in such a way that you are okay with that level of failure because there's an acceptable level of risk associated with that failure. And I'll use the analogy of structural engineering because I love to use this analogy. Every single component in the building that you are currently sitting in has a failure point. Every single one of them. Every single 2x4, 2x6, every single truss, every single piece of metal that's going through in a commercial building has a failure point. They know exactly how much weight it's going to take for that particular individual component to fail. But here's the deal. You're okay with that. Even though you know that entire building is set up with that type of structural failure in mind, and everybody understands that structural failure, there's no one component that can fail in those buildings, any of the buildings that you're in, that will cause the entire building to collapse and kill you. Because we understand that we have that failure baked into the overall architecture of the buildings that we are currently in, there's a certain level of acceptance that we're willing to deal with the failure that exists. And that's the same type of mindset that we're talking about with security architectures. You can be okay with a 2x4 or a workstation being compromised, but you should not be okay with a workstation or a 2x4 that compromises the entire environment or structure. And that's the analogy. So let's talk about how a lot of attacks work, basically telling narratives with the brand new icons that we just had built. So many attacks work like this. We target an internal user on the inside of a network. Now that can be done through a client-side attack, that can be done through a malware deployment, it can be done through a number of different things, social engineering, cold calling. However, we take over a computer system on the inside of an environment. Now, for many tests, people would say, you know what? It's an issue that is going, this for many pen testers, this is the end of it, right? We got access to the system, hallelujah, we can move on. No, really good pen testers move on. You see, they'll take that access for that particular computer system, and then they will very quickly pivot to other resources on the network. So if you're in the process of preparing for a penetration test, this is the mental model that you have to expect. Not only have to expect, you should require your pen tester to test this. Even if you don't allow them, or even if they don't get access to a workstation, you should create a simulated situation where the pen tester can get access to that workstation. Why? Because that's what the bad guys are doing. That's what the bad guys are doing. You see, pen tests are not proof that you can be hacked. That really, it really bothers me. Now, that's where our industry has gone. It's gone to the level of proof that a network or a system can be hacked. That's horrifying. That should be assumed that you're going to get compromised. What we're trying to do is we're finding clipping levels. What we're trying to do is find exactly how the security technical controls are in place in that organization. We're trying to find a level the defense kicks in appropriately. So if I get access to a standalone workstation through a spear phishing attack or for a number of different ways, if I get access to that workstation, I'm then going to pivot through PSExec to a system. And PSExec can support things like pass the hash. But PSExec can also passing of existing credentials. If I have access to a computer system with an existing set of credentials, I am that user on the network. We can also do pass the token. Same idea, but instead of a hash, we're using that domain level token. Remote desktop, we can get access to other systems, or we can use the pass the hash attacks. Now, the reason why we do this, the reason why attackers pivot around an environment is because we're looking for a certain level of access and certain level of resources that will elevate us to the point where we can get to domain admin. The initial system that we get access to may not have that level of access. I may need to jump around from system to system to system before I finally get access to a domain administrator's computer system, and that gives me the level of access that I'm looking for. But mark my words, every pen tester and every attacker, once they get access to a system, they are going to pivot to an internal workstations. That is ultimately what we are looking for when we're trying to defend this, because this is ultimately what happens. We gain access to a number of systems using these techniques like pass the token, PSExec, our desktop, pass the hash, and then we find one of those systems that maybe has a domain admin level account. Now, once I'm on a workstation with the domain admin level account, I can then emulate that token or impersonate that token rather, and now I am domain administrator from that point on. And all of this really stems from the fact that a lot of our organizations do not implement defense in depth. It bothers me. We keep on talking about defense in depth, but nobody really talks about what it actually means. Many vendors would have you believe that defense in depth is merely an issue of spending a lot of money on a lot of security products. That's not what we're talking about here whatsoever. I want to pause for a couple seconds to see if we have any comments here. Question was where, oh, philosophical discussion, Jared. I think that's a beer, and next time it's on me. Where can I get those icons? We actually bought them and then heavily modified them for like things like this and also for my classes. Will all these attack activities not be flagged? Drew asked a very, very, very good question. Will all these attack activities not be flagged? By and large, in most organizations, these activities will not be flagged. And that's in most organizations. I know there's people that are in this webcast who are like, dude, I would totally pick up 3 out of the 4 of these attacks that are on the slide. And that's great. That's awesome. But I think we need to understand that that is the exception. That is not the rule at all. So that is something that's kind of a terrifying thing to come to grips with, right? That by and large, most organizations will not detect any one of these. Now, and here's why. PSExec, who wrote PSExec? Does anyone want to take a crack on that? Is PSExec a hacker tool necessarily? Yep, absolutely. It's a Microsoft tool, right? It's a Microsoft tool. So we're not really using anything that is considered uber malware. So the vast majority of antivirus vendors will not look at PSExec as malware. Now, I know, like I said, there's a lot of pen testers in here that would absolutely use PSExec in almost every pen test they do. Pass the token. Pass the token is not something that is going to be detected by and large in many organizations because we're using the built-in capabilities of the domain for authentication. We're hiding in that gray area. Now, here's something really interesting, and Jared brought this up, and I think that this is absolutely brilliant. He said the activities are often logged, but they can also look like legitimate traffic. And I think that that's a key point. We're going to come back to that a little bit later because he's absolutely right. Many of these activities are, in fact, logged, but many of them are actually triggered as high-level alerts, and they wouldn't be because, by and large, they look like legitimate traffic, okay? All right, so let's talk about firewalls. We were talking about treating the internal network as hostile. We started out the segmentation section talking about this. You need to treat your internal network as hostile because it is. There is no trusted network. It drives me up a wall. Whenever you fire up Windows 7, it says, is this a public network and has like a park bench? Or is this your home network with a home? Because if it's a home network, shields are down, we're going to make everything work out of the box. Many environments treat their internal networks as though it's a home network. Basically, no firewall set up. And there's a couple of legitimate reasons why they would do this. One, they want to have remote administration to all of their workstations. Now, the problem with that mindset, though, is if you simply, if we have something as beautiful and wonderful as an idea around a firewall, and you completely disable it because you need to administer the computer systems, you are being lazy in your environment. I'm sorry, I know that that's a bit harsh. I know that it's probably a bit blunt, but it's true. And the reason why it's important for you to know that it's being lazy is almost every firewall vendor that's out there today, even Microsoft with group policy, you can put in exceptions in your firewall rules that say these IP addresses, these subnet ranges are allowed to access the workstations. So if we're going to set up our architecture appropriately, you create the firewall rule so workstation to workstation communication is not allowed. Actually, it's going to be part of the implied deny rule. And then you're going to say what is allowed to connect to these workstations. Things that would be allowed to connect to the workstations would be like help desk. Things that would be allowed to connect into the workstation would be like your SCCM server or your backup server or the security team. You can create these rules, and you very tightly have restricted what it is the attacker can do. Also, segmentation between business units and organizational units and sometimes subnets. I still don't understand this, but why do we allow full SMB traffic between the subnets? So a workstation in Dubai can actually talk to a workstation in San Francisco, part of the same company. That's insane. You should have file print servers where they can put things, and they basically communicate to those file and print servers, upload their files. They aren't going to be sharing files with each other, and if they are, you have much larger organizational issues that are political in nature. And they're not necessarily technical in nature as well. Also, many AV products already have firewalls in them. So if you look at McAfee, you look at Symantec, you have these firewall products. You have Symantec endpoint protection. You can turn that firewall on. Many people use it only for things like data loss prevention, or they use it for AV, and that's it. You need to make sure that your firewalls on your workstations and your notebook computers are configured with the same level of paranoia whenever you're on the inside of your network as it would be whenever you have somebody go to a hotel wireless network. Now, it sounds horrible, but think about it. Almost all of your organizations have subnets that systems administrators work from, or subnets that, like your domain controller or your backup servers work at. You can create those exceptions through their consoles on all of these different commercial products and allow those exceptions through. We need to start doing that. And if you're really, really sadistic and you're really desperate, you can even turn on the built-in Windows firewall, and you can configure that through group policy. So now here's what this does. It basically restricts the lateral movement of a bad guy. A bad guy gets access to a workstation, and now whenever they try to jump to other IP addresses, each one of those IP addresses has a firewall that's been enabled. Now, is this going to stop all attacks? No, it's not. If anything, the only thing this does is it increases the amount of time that a bad guy will have to spend to be successful in breaking into your organization. Also, it creates a whole bunch of doorways and dark closets or dark hallways where the bad guy is going to run into things. The bad guy is going to run into these firewalls. So this is beautiful because it creates more opportunities for you to detect the bad guy. But you have to be looking. If you're going to enable your firewall on all of your workstations, well, at that point, you need to make sure you're watching the firewall logs. Now, how this could be bypassed, I want to make this very, very clear. The goal of this webcast is not to give you strategies are going to absolutely stop all attackers. It's trying to make things more difficult. And as I said, we have a lot of pen testers that are on the webcast right now that are looking at this and they're like, oh, all I got to do is I got to sit on the workstation, wait until a backup process or an SCCM process logs in, steal that domain token, and then access the domain controller because you're still going to allow access to that. That's true, absolutely. You could still do that without question. But what we've done is we've created a couple of opportunities. One, we've created an opportunity to detect the bad guy whenever the pen tester or the bad guy tries to pivot and hit other workstations. That can generate an alert. Right now, with a lot of attack scenarios, the only time you know a defensive strategy is in place is only when you touch it. And if you touch it, that should set off an alert. So that creates a possible level of alerting and detection, and that's cool. The other thing that this does whenever you've set it up is it's buying the defender time to react. And I know that a lot of you guys, and I know Movix has a bunch of scripts that we're going to talk about here a little bit later, has a bunch of scripts that can automate a lot of these activities so you can go to total domain domination in just a matter of moments. This slows it down. Time is always an advantage of the defender in these types of situations. All right, so let's talk about evil network protocols. This is another thing that a lot of customers seem to miss whenever we're looking at the inside of their network. Um, and I don't know exactly why this is. I don't know if I can blame Cisco or Juniper or we can blame network administrators. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of routing and switching protocols, layer 2 level protocols, that are being broadcast across an entire network. And a lot of networks that you would consider to be secure, you can still find these protocols bleeding out all over the place. And this creates an excellent opportunity for bad guys to escape out of restricted environments, which may be another complete webcast in and of itself. So you have a whole bunch of networks that are broadcasting things like Cisco Discovery Protocol, Open Shortest Path First, Spanning Tree Protocol, Dynamic Trunking Protocol. So all of these protocols are not as well known in the security community. Now, a lot of you guys know about them, but they're not as well known in the security community or systems administrators because there's not a lot of tools that allow you just to point, click, and exploit them. And even if, we'll talk about one or two here in just a couple of seconds, but they're kind of buggy. They have some stability issues. Some of them haven't been updated in a while, but these can be every bit as devastating to an organization as having an unpatched 08067 system sitting on the network. We just got a question that popped up. IPv6, very, very, very good point. That we could probably have an entire presentation dedicated to that because IPv6 is a really nice way to identify additional workstations. And kind of what Steve is talking about is you can have a bunch of systems running IPv4, set up all the firewalls for IPv4, so there's no system-to-system communication. And then all you got to do is switch over to IPv6. And if you haven't enabled the firewall at that point, you can bypass those technologies. So that's a great point. Very, very good point. And also, IPv6 is really good for command and control because many security systems are not looking at it as well. All right. So now there's a number of tools that make this easy. Let's talk about dynamic trunking protocol. So here's a tool called Ursnia. It's been out for quite a while. We still use it. You can see we used this tool in a pen test that we did. I took the screenshot on August 6th, which is funny because I just realized that's my birthday. So this is a screenshot from my birthday this year. That's fun. So you can see the one right here. We got 84 trunk auto. We got a bunch of different trunk protocols that we're actually seeing the packets. On the left-hand side, you can see packets that can be somewhat problematic. Cisco Discovery Protocol, which I think Russell just popped up something about a lot of voice over IP networks for Cisco are dependent on it. 8021X or 8021Q, Dynamic Trunking Protocol, Hot Standby Routing Protocol, Spanning Tree Protocol. You can see the packets over here on the left, and then there's a number of attacks that you can do to try to attack them. In this example, we're talking about Dynamic Trunking Protocol. So what is Dynamic Trunking Protocol and why is it dangerous? Well, whenever you plug switches into each other, the switches have to learn where certain routes and where like routing gateways exist. So if you take like 4 switches and you plug them all into each other and you have one of those switches plugged into a router, they'll use dynamic trunking protocol to try to find out where the actual paths exist to get out. And they'll learn which switch is where, and then they'll have a little bit of a competition to figure out which one of these switches will be considered to be the root node. And at any rate, with the dynamic trunking protocol, we can jump into that mesh and have our computer system step up and say, hey, I'm a switch. and I have a lower MAC address. I've been on the network longer than all the rest of you, so I am now in charge of this entire switch topology. And I now want all of the traffic to get routed through me to get out to the routing point or get out to the internet. And dynamic trunking protocol doesn't have a lot of authentication built into it. It's basically a simple little challenge and response to see who wins, like rock, paper, scissors. But instead of doing rock, paper, scissors, it's rock, paper, scissors, dynamite. And dynamite always wins. So we become the switch that can control all the rest of the traffic. So what does it look like when it's running? So if we take a look at it, you can see that we have a whole bunch of ARP traffic popping up. That means that we were able to become that root node, and now we can see lots of traffic on networks that we normally couldn't see, which is pretty cool. Now we can test it once we've actually joined a VLAN that we can now see, and then we can start pinging other systems on the other side of that VLAN. So if you try to set up restricted environments, you go through all of the effort of doing 802.1q, 802.1x, all of these different network level authentication protocols, and you allow dynamic trunking protocol to be out there, well, dang it, I can completely bypass all of those different security technologies. So you should be looking just right now, fire up a sniffer. Do you see spanning tree protocol? Do you see dynamic trunking protocol? Do you see Cisco discovery protocol? Do you see open shortest path first protocol traffic? Now, some of these protocols, and this is kind of cool, you won't see on your workstation. Why? Well, because your workstation hasn't identified itself as a switch. For example, if you want to test for dynamic trunking protocol, one of the best ways you can do is unplug your computer system, turn on the sniffer on your Linux box of choice, then plug it in. One of the first few sets of packets you should see if dynamic trunking protocol is enabled is the DTP packets. So David just brought up a great point. Isn't it dangerous to do this on a pen test because of DOS potential? Absolutely, sir. It is undoubtedly dangerous to do this. Whenever you become a switch, your system is not a switch. You can quickly overload the network card on your computer system. As I said, this is pen test preparations. Take these cards away from the pen tester before they even get there. So you can go through and can enable things like Cisco Root Guard to basically lock down your switch to make it far more secure. So that's really, really a great point. And I would say 9 out of 10 of the pen tests that we do, if we find these protocols, the customer will just take our word for it and say, yep, those are dangerous, we're shutting them off. But we get that customer once in a blue moon, like on my birthday, and they'll say, no, let's test this, let's make it work. Those are awesome customers. We love those customers. Those are our favorite customers. But if you can shut these protocols down, you don't have to worry about it actually showing up on a report. So Bobby just brought up a question. Good afternoon. How can I see the questions or messages from everyone in chat? I don't know. I've never quite figured out how that actually works in this. I mean, I know they come to me. I've never really gotten to the other side of the fence to figure out how students can see them. And I don't know. That might be a built-in feature for this platform. All right, so let's talk about shares. Sometimes, as pen testers, we make things harder on ourselves than we really should. And this is something that I work with and I fight through in every new pen tester that we work with. Like I'll pick on Tim. Like when Tim joined up 2-3 years ago, you know, he had done some pen testing with some other companies. He'd done a lot of pen testing with the Army, and you know, he was worried about, you know, like what's the overall skill set of a penetration tester. And I think a lot of that has to come from the fact that many of us in this industry are really driven by ego. And I know I'm not immune to this at all, but we like to come across as ninjas, right? And you know, we're always trying to find this elite 0-day or this neat way to bypass antivirus or assembly techniques. And a lot of that's kind of bravado, right? We're pounding our chest trying to prove that we're uber, or whatever that means. And I've just kind of gotten to the point where I'm tired of it. And the reason why I'm tired of it is because, look, this isn't hard. I mean, penetration testing, network pen testing, web application pen testing isn't hard. It's just an acquired and a learned skill set. And if you're out to be Uber, if you're out to be elite hacksaw, I have no use for you. I just don't. And that means from my company perspective, that means in my social circles, I really, really don't. It just bothers me whenever people, you know, they talk about how uber elite their different attacks are. And this isn't, there's nothing that highlights this more than watching a senior pen tester working with a junior pen tester. Like many times you'll have a junior pen tester that'll show up and they'll find an application and they quickly fire up a debugger, and they're going through memory and they're like, oh wow, this particular application has a safe SEH enabled on these 4 dynamic link libraries, but it's not enabled on these other dynamic link libraries. I need to go through and find a jump ESP because it can overwrite the return pointer whenever it sits in ESP, and then I'm going to overwrite the SEH chain, and I'm going to jump to that function in that dynamic link library that doesn't have safe SEH. And while the junior pen tester is doing all this elite uber kung fu, you can always see the senior pen tester that comes up and says, hey, I ran NetUse. There's a admin share that's mounted to all systems in Z, and in there is a passwords file. And you can always see that junior pen testers get deflated, right? They come up with all this really, really cool stuff, and the senior pen tester that's been around for a long time just ran NetUse and Z colon and is like, yeah, I have all their passwords now. And that's something that we miss, right? And we miss it, and I don't quite know why we miss it. And let me explain why I think it's a problem. You remember years ago, whenever we were talking about the problems and the evils of null sessions, when like WinFingerprint and Enum and all these tools first came on the scene, it was all about trying to find shares and enumerating information from null sessions, and a lot of that kind of went by the wayside. Well, I don't want to say it's back. It never left. Many pen testers are doing the whole Nmap Nessus Metasploit, Nmap Nessus Metasploit, Nmap Nessus Metasploit. And sometimes you have to go back to your roots. So look at your systems and figure out what shares exist. So you can do NetUse and see what shares your help desk technicians are creating. Okay, that's number one. Because there's going to be shares that are automatically mounted on your workstations that may terrify you. So I'll tell you where we've seen this. Like a workstation built by help desk for us, the pen testers, we get access as a standard user account on that system. We run NetUse, and it still has a share where they can pull down all of their build documents for the various applications, pull down all of their patches and all the required software for that system. Why is it on that computer system? Because the system they used to create the master image had that share, so now that share exists on every single system. So that's cool. So sit down at your computer system, and let's run a couple of commands. Run netview just by itself in a domain. What do you see? Do you see anything that makes you uncomfortable? Do you see any open shares or systems for admin or help desk? So if you see these systems and you can identify what shares are open on these computer systems, well, that's what the pen testers are going to do. We're going to try and sit down and we're going to enumerate all the shares that exist. So also some other things that you can do. We did NetUse, shows you the shares. NetView shows you the other share. NetUse shows you the shares on a local system. NetView shows you the shares on the network. And we can also do things like NetUsers /domain to dump all the users from your domain. There's a number of net utilities that you can use for local and domain level access. And we have some cheat sheets a little bit later I'll give you that'll help out with that. I'm going to pause for a couple seconds and let's go through a couple of different questions that have popped up. Net share, absolutely frank. Appreciate that it sounded like you actually beat your chest even though you can't see me do it. Thank you, Anthony. Crypto's made SMB scanner to look for your networks. Pretty nice. It's on GitHub. All right, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it and paste it and send it to all. So we're going to copy that, paste that, and then we're going to send to everybody. So now everybody should have gotten that answer. So that's a cool answer. So thank you very much, sir. Why do we compete rather than collaborate? Bob, I honestly don't know. Hold on, I'm trying to, there we go, got some cross chatter. All right, so that's kind of, when we're talking about shares, we just got to look for them. We're not trying to get into advanced Uber, post-exploitation kung fu. There was a lot of really great presentations at DerbyCon. Matthew Graber's presentation just freaking rocked the house. Mubix has tons of videos on this online. This isn't about making pen testers better. It's about what can we do to try to make life hell for a pen tester. And those are just some simple things that we can do. All right, so let's talk a little bit about detecting the insider. Here is another kind of axiom that I'm sure that people will get mad at me. If you cannot detect an insider, your security architecture sucks. And that's a tough thing for a lot of people to relate to. But the fact is the world is moving on. And so it goes, right? Things progress and so it goes. But the world is moving on. Whenever we look at attacks, we look at the progression of what's happening. Right now, Black Hills Information Security, for getting remote access to networks and to systems, we haven't used a remote exploit in probably the past 2 months. We're still getting access to networks, but we're not really, completely hung up on running Nessus scans and looking for red and purple and then trying to exploit those services. If you're doing Nmap Nessus Metasploit, you're about 3 to 5 years behind the curve. On how you do a self-assessment and how you do a penetration test. And I think Snowden has driven that home. Attackers using valid existing credentials to move around a network. That's kind of what we're talking about here that I think is so important that we need to start looking at. So just some simple things. Can you detect a user accessing thousands of files? Can you detect a user which is accessing hundreds of systems? If not, these are the types of questions that we need to start asking, and these are the types of products we need to start demanding show up in our environment. Future targeted attacks will not be using malware. Not as much as they do now. For most of our tests, whenever we use malware, we'll use malware for the first system, for the beachhead, but we don't use malware on the rest of the environment. And we're also seeing this used heavily by the bad guys. We're looking at nation-state level attacks that are coming at our environments. We see the bad guy use malware for the first system, and then after that, they use existing built-in credentials, they use existing protocols on the network. Now, the reason why this is troublesome to me is whenever I talk to a lot of forensics vendors, let's just say, a lot of very large-scale forensics vendors, they're all about detecting malware in the environment. They'll basically find malware in the environment, they create a really cool signature or an indicator of compromise for that malware, and they'll scan the rest of your environment looking for that indicators of compromise. If it comes back clean, well, the system's clean. That's absolutely a load of malarkey. It doesn't work that way. Many times the bad guys, once they get access, they'll continue to remote desktop, they'll continue to SSH into the environment, and they don't really just use malware unless they absolutely have to. So this is a learning moment for a lot of us in computer security, and we need to start looking at ways to detect it. So let's talk about how. All right. So let's talk about logs. So sure, you're watching for locked accounts, right? You're going to be trying to identify accounts that are locked out on your systems. We would fully expect that, right? We would fully expect that they watch those. But are you monitoring for the total aggregate number of failed login attempts? There's a really cool script. I don't know if it's out on Movix's lists or not, but there's a really cool script where you can do like a for loop at the command line on a Windows system to do basically password spraying. You basically take the output from net users /domain, pull all of those users, and then you try a single password against the thousands of users in your environment. You won't lock out a single one of them because you're only using one password per account. But if you're creative about what password you try, you're going to get lucky. You're going to break into additional accounts. You're going to pivot. So we need to kind of tweak our logging just a hair. So we're not just looking for locked accounts, but we're looking for the total aggregate number of failed login attempts. Have you enabled file and directory logging for sensitive directories and files? I have people absolutely flip their noodle whenever I say they should do this. They say, oh, that's going to be one of those really, really, stupid level amounts of logging that's just going to be a lot of data. But you know what's funny about that data? And I've said this before, it's useful. It's really useful. So right now, we are logging all kinds of crap that's never going to be useful in an incident. Now, there's people out there like Antop Javakin that'll say, well, you never know, it might be useful. And I guess he has a point if you have an absolutely unlimited amount of storage space. But you're doing things like process tracking logging. You're looking at, maybe logging spin locks and CFMORs. I don't know. But there's all these logs that you collect, and they're worthless. You don't look at them. They haven't been helpful in any incidents ever. And you're just logging it because some book somewhere said that you need to log it. But whenever it gets to something that's useful, like object access logging, at that point, as soon as we get to that threshold, people are like, oh, geez, that's too far. God forbid we collect a whole bunch of event logs for something that would be useful in the event of an incident. This would undoubtedly be useful in an incident, right? You can basically say this account was compromised and this account gained access to these 150,000 files. That's good, squishy. I mean, that's the type of stuff as an incident responder that you absolutely want to have. Now, people may still freak out at the number of event logs. I'm not talking about doing object and file accessing for every single file across your environment, but you know where your sensitive files are. You know where your sensitive shares are. Maybe you should be watching those. Maybe you need to increase the level of logging on those shares. Or here's another idea. What if you just logged the failed object access attempts? Not even trying to get to the not even trying to get to the point of doing all successful and failed, but just failed. level object access attempts. Because then you would pick up somebody like a Snowden or an insider that's trying to go through all of the different shares and seeing what they can get access to. You would start seeing those triple arms. So even just turning on failed logs. Andre brought up an absolutely hilarious, hilarious quote. And dude, I'm going to give you full credit for this because this is awesome. Andre said, I want to buy one of those new firewalls that are Snowden proof. Snowden proofing is the #1 feature of 2014 security appliances. We need to get our Snowdens out of our networks. Dude, hats off to you. I think you got the quote of the day. So here's the deal. What we need to do is, if anybody goes to RSA next year, I'm not going this year because last year I got really, really depressed and I started drinking heavily, which would have happened anyway, the drinking, but I don't need the depression to go along with it because that's just a bad habit. But see how many of the vendors, when you're walking around, have Snowden somewhere on their signs or a picture of him. And I think we need to start creating a website like Snowden Watch, like how many security vendors are actually, using Snowden as marketing as well. So very, very funny. All right, so the next thing I want you guys to look at is, are you watching for concurrent logins from user accounts? So you can actually restrict this down with third-party tools. UserLock is one of them that you can set up. And also Microsoft has some tools. Now, these tools are a little bit long in the tooth, but you need to look into them. And the reason why is these tools will allow you to say, this user can only log in from this particular workstation. Now that is very helpful. Now, the user is still going to access resources on the rest of the network, but a full interactive logon with another workstation is only going to exist if you've authorized it. This is one of those beautiful things that'll shut down a lot of attackers. I'll get valid credentials on a workstation where I exist, but I really want to get a interpreter session over there. So many times what I'll do is I'll use my existing token, my existing session, pass the hash, whatever, and I'll use that to get an interpreter session on another box. But that'll be another domain level login from another workstation, and that'll be disallowed, and it'll be shut down immediately. This is cool. This is something that we all need to start doing, restricting your users down to the workstation that they use. Now, there's going to be users that roam, right? There's going to be users that float around and go to all kinds of different workstations, help desks, admins. Those users you can create exceptions for, and that's awesome. So create exceptions for those users. But you can also do increased user awareness training with those users, and you can do increased monitoring on those high-risk level accounts. That's what we're talking about here. All right, so let's talk about low and medium vulnerabilities. As I said, so many of us, when we're doing pen testing or even just standard vulnerability assessment, we ignore anything that's not red. If it's not red or purple or pink, we ignore it, right? Because we're not going to deal with all those medium vulnerabilities and all those low vulnerabilities, because that's just not worth our time, because the tool didn't tell us they were red. And you know what? A lot of the vulnerability assessment tools that are out there, they kind of push us in this place where it's kind of our fault. And the reason why is a lot of the vulnerability tools, if they kicked up everything to red or critical, people would freak out and say, dude, that's a false positive. And for every, like really good vulnerability you find that's in low and medium, you have like 250 unsupported cipher types for, browsers or a web server that is really just a waste of time. All right. So let's go through and let's talk about this a little bit. So scanning issues. So we're quickly becoming a commodity industry, right? The way people go through and they look at pen test offerings or they look at vulnerability assessments is like toilet paper. When you need it, you don't care what you get. We're all doing things the same. We're all reading from the same manual. We're all trying to do things the exact same way. The tools give us red. We fix the red. We ignore the yellow, the gold, the amber, the blue, and the green, right? We completely get rid of those. And we just don't worry about them because, dang it, we got to fix the reds. Well, I'll give you some examples of things that have really, really helped us, break into networks that haven't even been Metasploitable type vulnerabilities. As I said, a lot of people, whenever they talk about what a pen test is and Black Hills Information Security approaches them, and we say, look, it's going to take us, you have 250 hosts. They're not the exact same types of servers. You got web servers, you got VPN servers, you got 9 different types of web technologies floating around out there. We say, gosh, it's going to take us a couple of weeks to go through that. And a lot of our customers look at us like we're insane, like we're trying to rip them off. And they say, wait a minute. I know what you really do. You scan with Nessus and then you run Metasploit on anything that's red. Well, it would be a really huge disservice to this industry if all pen testing companies did that. That's just horrible. There's companies out there that don't do that. You got like Trusted Sec from Dave Kennedy, you got InGuardians, you got CounterHack from Ed Scotus, you got Secure Ideas from Kevin Johnson, you got Layered Sec with Bryce Gilbert. These companies, people I know and I love dearly, they don't do that. They'll actually go through every single one of those findings, because whenever we're doing a pen test, it's not an issue of just looking for the reds. It's really an issue of trying to learn about a network. And you really don't learn about a network until you get down to the greens and blues that we need to look for. So we need to start looking before a pen test ever begins. We need to start looking at things like we need to start looking at those other findings. And the informational, as I said, my company, sometimes I push the people a little bit too hard, I know, and I say we got to look at all the lows. So I take it upon myself many times as I'm laying in bed. I could be out reading news stories talking about economic collapse, or this political party is going to burn us, or that political party is going to burn us, or whatever crap is happening on the news. But I actually go through and I read these informationals that show up. And I go through the lows, because I know a lot of the times my guys may not have time, so I'm helping them out with it, right? And I'd say it's about once a week we get access to a network through those types of findings, just simply by learning, just by just figuring out how a network is actually put together. And that's cool. That's really, really cool. So we can do that before a pen tester ever gets there. So here's a couple of examples of some gems you can find, right? This was an informational warning. This is directory listing. So almost any vulnerability assessment scanner, when they find a web server, they try to go through and list out all of the directories that exist for you. Well, read them. I mean, you go through and actually look at every single one of the directories and say, does this make sense? Does that sound right? Does that sound like it might be sensitive? This might be cool. Well, this wonderful little web server was one that was hello.php. This is a backdoor that was installed on this web server. And if you look at the date was from 2009. This network had been compromised for years. And the only time they found it was when we actually looked at the informational and we found hello.php. And they said, oh my gosh, we've been pen tested by like PricewaterhouseCoopers, KPMG, SAIC. How come nobody's ever detected this? Well, they didn't detect it because it wasn't red. It's all about learning. It's all about trying to figure out what's going on in your environment. And as a on the ground, nose to the grindstone security professional, you guys have time. It's not like a 2-week pen test. You guys have weeks and months to sit and go through this, or at least pawn it off to some FNG that can do it. This is another one that was fun. It's just a really cool. And I think I gave a couple of these at previous Paul.com sessions, but these are just neat. This is one where Ethan was testing an SMTP server to basically do verification as to whether or not email addresses were valid. See, we do a lot of recon, find a bunch of email addresses, but we don't know if they're valid or not. So we found this really cool way that you could actually log in and you could check to see if that email address existed. We scripted it up in Python. Now we can validate email addresses very, very, very quickly before we ever launch an attack. Looking a little bit closer, we found out that you could spam the inside of the network from the inside of the network. Now, you couldn't do outgoing spam. You couldn't use them as a great big spam relay going out to the rest of the internet. But for this particular device, you could spam from an internal to an internal. As long as it was from an internal, it was fine. So we found some ways to mess around with some of the headers, and we could do outright spoofing playing with it. So this is fun. I shot this email at the bottom. Abraham Lincoln, the president at whitehouse.gov, sale, we're going bankrupt, everything must go. And then, of course, the text was theater sucks. Now, it was funny because whenever I showed this to the customer was like, dude, that's not funny. And I thought to myself, what, too soon? All right, here's another one. Informational, just a web server found on port 8888. Now, a lot of vulnerability assessment scanners have caught up with this, and they're now starting to flag this as sometimes red. Whenever you see like Apache, Jakarta, Tomcat extensions enabled on a server, and you have like the Apache Web Application Manager for Tomcat, you can see down there that we can actually upload WAR files. So we can actually give it a URL to a WAR file and say deploy, and it'll actually deploy it to the server. Well, it just so happens that you can go through and you can update and you can deploy things like the awesome laudanum utilities from Kevin Jackson and the laudanum team. So you can put this script up, this JSP, and then you can run commands and take over the computer system. And that's just a lower and informational saying, hey, there's a web server found on this port that now leverages itself into full-on exploit on a computer. So doing it right requires time, requires knowledge, patience, almost obsessive compulsive level of looking at things, requires a cool shirt and a mechanical bull. And as I always like to say in my presentations, happy birthday, Kevin. Of course, I said I wouldn't do that anymore, but I like doing it. I like doing it as much as possible with Kevin Johnson. By the way, we also got Mike Poor on that mechanical bull, and I have pictures of that too. And no, I'm not sharing. All right, so let's talk about pen test awesome sauce. So how far down the rabbit hole can you go? I could have spent an entire presentation just kind of going over cheat sheet stuff that Mubix or Rob Fuller has already done. I'd be hard pressed to find anybody, maybe Matt Graber, maybe a couple of other people, Chris maybe, but there's very few people that have really dove into post-exploitation as much as Rob has. So he's got a bunch of resources that are available. They're basically squirreling all over the place. You got GitHub, of course, and you've got his Google Doc, where you can go through and you can look at post-exploitation checklists as well. Now, if you read the comments in the Google Doc, it's absolutely hilarious. We got Lynn H that says, "Why am I always included in your hacker crap?" which I thought was fun. And then Micah went through and said, "This content is now over here. You need to go to http://postexploitation.com, Doco. You need ID, system commands. That's now where it is." And it's all up and down. Micah has put this all over the place in the document. You need to go here. It's over here. It's over here. It's over here. So I went over there, and I got this error. And it pops up, and it says, "This website has been suspended. Please contact us immediately. The account may have been expired or is under investigation. Please contact our support or sales team ASAP." It's one of those uh-oh things. So hopefully it's an issue of a unpaid bill, not them saying, "Oh, this is hacker technology." All right, so the last section of today, and then we're going to wrap this up, is getting caught. It's absolutely essential to find at what point does malware get caught leaving your environment before a pen tester gets there. And to be honest with you, your pen tester should be testing this. A pen tester shouldn't be just getting remote shell out of your environment and saying, "Ha, I hacked you," and then like high-fiving their friends and then dancing a little jig. No, 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 no. It's not about being lead. It's not about being Uber. It's about sharing. It's about collaboration. It's not about competition, as someone said earlier, which is absolutely cool to avoid. All right, so feel free to steal this idea. I'm trying to get this out to as many pen testing firms as possible. Some of the people at BHIS are kind of mad at me for sharing this because it's something we do and we don't know anybody else that's doing it. I teach for a living. I do pen testing for a living. And sometimes those really aren't, those aren't really tied up with capitalism so much. But this is something I think every single organization should be doing, okay? So here we got a bunch of different types of malware that you can create. We got custom malware, ASCII code, shell injection, encoded malware, raw malware, basic backdoor, PDF, Word document, signed applet, and this is just a section. And almost all of these you can create from the social engineering toolkit. Okay, so you can go use Dave Kennedy's social engineering toolkit, and you can basically fire up all these different types of malware on your environment, set up an Amazon EC2 instance, and then start seeing which of those, whenever they reverse connect, are being detected by your IDS IPS systems, and which of those are not being detected by your IDS IPS system, and then start noting it and start trying to plug those holes. It's absolutely fascinating to me that we will scan the outside of environments, we will find all kinds of vulnerabilities, but whenever it comes to extrusion detection, it's very little in the way of actually testing it. I'm thinking about writing up a blog post or maybe even a book on extrusion assessment, but we'll have to give that time. By the way, if you have a managed security service provider like Dell SecureWorks or Verizon, this can also get you to lower your bill with them. How does that work? Well, let's talk it over. So what you do is, let's say you got contract with, managed security service provider X, all right? Now, a lot of these managed security service providers have created signatures that are so incredibly general, so it reduces the false positives, that they don't detect a lot of this stuff. They just don't, because they can't. If they try to detect all these different types of reverse command and controls, they'd be lit up like a Christmas tree every day. So a lot of them just don't detect this. So what you can do is create a spreadsheet just like what you see here, and whenever it comes to contract renewal, sit down with them and say, "We were able to bypass and completely undetected by your managed security service provider service that you're giving us and charging us a lot of money for, and we could bypass it with all these different technologies. So what are we going to do better in the future? And then what are we going to do? What are we going to do to help get this cost down?" So Steve, this is going to be recorded. I'll get this session out to everybody. Will, I'll get this. Trust me, I'll send out a link to everybody so you guys all have a recording. Okay. So This too, these are C2 checks, and we have all the different types of malware, but also C2 channels. And I've got just a couple of handful of them here. HTTPS view state, covert channel, HTTPS channel, non-standard TCP, clear text, compressed data, encrypted data. You can play with all of these cool hacker tools, but do it from the perspective of testing your security appliances. And you should be doing that on a regular basis. All right, so giving up. Should we give up? Well, maybe. I don't know. We need to not only test a lot of the command and control detection and a lot of malware, but also need to test your internet whitelisting and internet blacklisting as well. So this is another one of those things. I'm spending a lot of time talking about Ethan today, but Ethan found a way to bypass a lot of internet whitelisting products. Now, how he was able to do this was pretty cool. A lot of these internet whitelisting products, not all of them, but a lot of them, you can whitelist a domain. Now, the problem with trying to whitelist a domain is where exactly do you do a position match on the domain and the URL? So what a lot of them do is they'll just do a regular expression on the URL and see if that domain exists anywhere within that URL. So what we can do is use that to bypass it. So here's one of our backdoor computer systems. So we can try to connect to it, and it says this page cannot be displayed. And the reason why is because it's not on the whitelist, right? So we want to find a way to communicate with our .179 IP address out on the internet. Now this is for our custom malware that we've created that communicates over HTTP. So if we see a site like this, well, it means that we probably can't get to our command and control server. So how do we get by it? So he found out that you could do things like you could put the name of the domain. Let's just say it's something like wxyz.com, right? So you could do like a Google search, and you could exclude wxyz.com and then do a search on kittens, and it would completely bypass the whitelisting product because it saw the domain in the URL. Now, the domain was actually put in as an argument to another website that you were going to, but because it saw it, it says, okay, this is clearly whitelisted because I let everything to wxyz domain go, but in fact, it was just a search option in Google. So it was a cool way to bypass it. Now, we found that in our backdoor, our 179 address, that we could put in a variable in the URL with the domain that we were coming from, and it would work just fine. So we could communicate to our command and control server. We just needed to make sure that all of our web traffic back and forth had the domain as a parameter that was put into it. That's just the type of testing you need to do before a pen tester gets there. You go through, you test the standard malware, you test the standard C2 stuff that exists from Interpreter, reverse HTTPS, reverse DNS, DNSCAT from Ron Bose. Got all of these different tools that you test before a pen tester gets there, and you're going to be in a really cool place because now when the pen tester gets there, a lot of that stuff that they normally do has been taken off the table. Now they have to spend like an extra 2 weeks of their time not just documenting what always works for them, but now you're pushing them to start looking further, start looking at the technology, trying to find advanced bypass techniques, and that's what most pen testers live for. So moving forward, this is something that I always try to get across for everything that we do. Look, guys, this may sound a bit self-serving, but information security and pen testers and security assessment, basically the people who listen to paul.com and come to these webcasts, look, we're the pointy end of the stick. We're the people that are driving a lot of things in computer security. If we get complacent, the rest of the industry is going to follow us. And I'm here to tell you that we've gotten complacent. As defenders and self-assessors and as pen testers, we have gotten complacent in what we do. And the rest of the industry will follow us. Dev teams, ops teams, forensicators, lethal forensic, people who do forensics. I'm saying hi to Rob Lee. If penetration testing and security assessments can be done down to a checklist or an automated tool, it will be, and we're all going to be out of a job. Whether you're a pen tester or you're somebody that's trying to do self-assessment in your organization, some vendor's going to roll up and they're going to show you product X, and it's going to look slick and it's going to look awesome, and management's going to look at you and they're going to ask, well, why do we need you? And if we're not careful, we're going to get lazy, we're going to get compliant or complacent. And whenever they finally ask you that question, why do we need you? You will not have a good answer. So we need to be diligent in everything we do. You need to demand more from your pen testers. You need to demand more from your security team whenever you're looking at self-assessment before the pen testers ever get there. And that was the goal of this webcast, to make us all a little bit better in computer security.